Ganesh, I think you should start.
Okay, okay. Hello, sir. Are you there?
Yes, yes, I'm very much here.
Okay. So we can start now since we have numbers of participants. Okay. So first of all, I would like to congratulate Dr. Brahma Prakash for this wonderful book. And before I would like to introduce about some theme of this book, I would like to brief about our forum, Speaking from Margin. So, on behalf of Speaking from Margin, I, Ganesh Gaigouria, would like to welcome all of you to today's book discussion series 2023. Speaking from Margin is an academic platform for research scholars, sociopolitical activists, and students to engage with contemporary discourses in social sciences. It attempts to build academic solidarities for achieving social justice in higher education. We use this space to build solidarity among researchers from various marginal locations with to engage with evolving knowledge paradigms within social sciences. In the past, we have organized several lectures and book discussions which have received overwhelming response from the academic community and beyond. Our past speakers include Professor Kancha Ilaya, Professor Rajiv Bhargav, Professor Nivedita Menon, Professor Nandini Sundar, Dr. Sudhir Kumar Suthar, Professor Satish Deshpande, Professor Samyabar Chaudhary, Dr. Nasrin Chaudhary, Rahul Verma, Professor Neera Chandok, Jaya Hassan, Professor N. Sukumar, Dr. Gautam Bhan, and it's n number of list actually we have. So through our research methods, lecture series, and book discussion series, we try to bring to our audience and participants the opportunity to interact with experts from various social science disciplines with the objective to facilitate a ground for aspiring researchers to get a better hold of contemporary debates in social sciences and equip themselves with the better variety of issues lying therein. Today, we are here for our book discussion series 2023, and interestingly, the book is open to more than just the discipline of social sciences. The book title is Body on the Barricades, Life, Art and Resistance in Contemporary India, written by Brahma Prakash. To discuss the book, we have with us the author of the book, Dr. Brahma Prakash. Brahma Prakash teaches at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. We all have been familiar with his engagement in discussion about his first book published by Oxford University Press entitled Cultural Labor, Conceptualizing Folk Performance in India, which is an extensive study of the debates around caste, culture, and performance of the subaltern communities in India, whose work is neither considered art or culture nor labor in the discourse of aesthetics and labor. His research interests include rituals, festivals, cultural enactments, and non-Western aesthetic theories. He is a recipient of the Dwight Concure Award of the Performance Studies International for his contribution to the field of cultural performance of marginalized communities. He has published his articles in Asian Theatre Journal, Theatre Research International, several edited volumes, and various news channels. So the book is very important because the study of the body, individual being, and their experience has become very prominent in the contemporary academic discourse. The current social and political analysis are more deal with the life of individuals, but generally and in layman's sense known as private life. The notion of private life in the current academia and politics is no longer as private. This invention of the biopolitical continuum provides us with a greater understanding of the political and social phenomena. The life event of individual being has become fundamental to understand everyday politics and its culture. Therefore, it is necessary to unmask the aesthetic fields which is inherently connected to the politics in contemporary academic discourse. Contemporary academic discourse and provide a sense of the interface between these aesthetics and everyday politics. And undoubtedly, as scholars from aesthetic study, Brahma Prakash painstakingly unraveled and attempted to provide a sense of the interface of political events and their drama with the contour of aesthetics or sensory to the reader, which has the peculiar potentiality to communicate and induce both through writing and images to make a very catalyze the complex interfaces between the objective material world and the subjective metaphysical human condition. This interface bestowed is not solely embedded in the abstract principle of fiction he draws from different poems and literatures, but they are more deeply entrenched in the body of objective realism that he draws from the live events of various protests. The book not only embodies the narratives that rise out of the real precarity, protest, and objective sensory of human experience, but also the reflection of past memory and literature, providing a possibility and hope for solidarity, resistance, and restructuring of a utopian world of fraternity. The true events of the society recreated and narrated very interestingly in the book, which is no less than any cinematic or fictitious novel or autobiography. Since Speaking from Margin is a student-driven forum, we are excited to listen to Brahma Prakash's personal motivation and experience when he has employed a thought to write about this book, what tends to him for writing this book at this juncture, how can the young researchers encounter the idea of the body and navigate it into different times, context, and anecdotes he portrays in various events and precarity. The basic concept in this book moves around the notion of the body in the preservation and prerogative by authority, self, and society, which seems beyond any anthropological reading of the body. So, how is a body entangled with different counterparts, able and disabled, to perform a meaningful or meaningless life in the form of art and accumulate resistance and attempt to cripple down despotism? Thus, many questions arise. How is your idea in the book distinctively envisaged and juxtaposed with the reader's imagination of the practical events? You engulfed solid philosophical and theoretical vocabulary by referring to different philosophers and poets, which simultaneously reflect a scientific, systematic, methodological sense with footnotes. But in contrary, you have also precisely mentioned the non-conventional method deployed by you. In lieu, you rely on the methodology of heart. Therefore, we would like to know what does it entail and how can we, as young researchers, cultivate the confidence and autonomy to deploy and learn from the everydayness of reality and write about it in the rawness of it all. As an author, how did you explicate these multiple essays into an eclectic anthology? Can you share your experience of producing this unequivocal work? Lastly, how important is it to keep writing in times when the very activity of writing has been criminalized and condemned? However, you are not limited to these questions itself. So by posing these questions, I invite Dr. Brahma Prakash to deliver and share his views and thoughts with us. Okay, the format of the discussion would be like, we'll speak around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer session. Okay, then over to you, Dr. Prakash.
Thank you, Ganesh, and thank you, Khushbu. I think she was also part of this team, and so hope that I'm audible. Is it clear?
Yes.
And I would like to really thank us Speaking from Margin for organizing this event, and obviously for all the participants who are living this really wonderful weather in Delhi and joining this discussion, maybe a very boring discussion for that matter, but I will try to do my best. Yeah, so many questions come up, and because this book is quite unusual for me too, because when I was writing, so this question that what motivates you to write this book, I was there was no plan to write this book. First of all, there was no plan as such, because if I can say about my previous book, Cultural Labor, then there was a plan, there was a schemata, and there was a structure that how I'm going to do field work and what is going to be the center of the debate, how I'm going to do the empirical research. So all were in mind. For this book, there was nothing in mind. It all happened. So I should say that it just happened. And therefore, it is also when I'm getting different kinds of reactions, responses, then I'm trying to observe that how people are reading the book. And what I realized within 2 months that people are reading for different reasons, and they are able to find out different things. And that is what is giving me some sense of satisfaction, but also more motivation. So now I'm getting more motivated now. Otherwise, there was no motivation as such. Yeah, so this all have started I think there were 4 regions. I will just give you the background, and I think let us talk as we are talking in a more interactive kinds of environment or interactive kinds of session, because I think that we all are trying to explore our own methods And I'm not saying that whatever done, I have done this is my second book. But again, I should not say that I have found my methods or methodology for that matter. I'm still in search of method. So constantly I'm in search of method, and but again, that is what drives my research, and that is what, so two things. And I think I also take from many scholars where we are thinking about some idea of the newness, that how to provide some kinds of newness in terms of theories, in terms of emancipatory discourses, in terms of our own engagement. So this all happened and I will just give you background to make these larger connections. So earlier I used to do a street theaters, even part of JNU, so I was part of the street theaters. And somehow this whole, when I became faculty here, the things are stopped and I was not able to do that activities. So somewhere I had this frustration of that things, how to pull out your creative language and how to express your things, because you don't have direct audience now, and how you're going to engage with the audience, how you're going to engage with some of those public domain discourses. Because one of the concerns that really I feel is that how we are going to engage with the public domains, how we are going to engage with the larger communities. And that has been the things, because when you are doing academic writing, then many times we all know that academic writings have its own limitations, despite of its profundity, despite of its complexities, it has own limitation. So how to also break this language, how to break this grammar. And because I think, because this whole platform we are talking from, speaking from margin, and we know our history. So it is not just about how much we are going to engage in academia, but the problem is that how we are going to communicate our research. And that I think also becomes our methodological kinds of exploration, because you all are part of this in some kinds of egalitarian discourse. Then I think one of the major problems that we are all are facing is that this is not, maybe we are doing wonderful research, but how we are going to communicate with larger masses. And we have some predecessors for that matter. Fully already did some different kinds of writing. You already have many writers who did some different kinds of writing. So he was writing in dialogue form. So one can ask this question, that why he was picking up this dialogue form. So for me, this whole idea of this book is of course, many people have discussed this theme about the COVID, about this whole social kinds of situation, about the kinds of curtailment that we are facing. But I will say that for me, the most interesting part of this book is my own exploration in writing, that how I want to, and my own trying to find some kinds of methods. Also, I was doing some kinds of poetry translation. So I would many times translate Pablo Neruda in Hindi, and more in a kinds of lyrical writing. I will also translate Maya Angelou in Hindi. And so that was some kinds of exploration I was doing, but I was not satisfied. And I think all these were happening because I was feeling the limits of the language. I was feeling that how to engage with some of the genres and all these things. And then one day things happened, one newspaper approached me, and this was a kind of, I will say, a kind of event in my life. So this newspaper approached me that whether I would like to write a column. I wrote this column that was never got published, but I realized, I felt that mode of writing is coming. I felt some different kinds of realization that yes, I can write, and I can maybe able to connect with the larger audience, the larger reader. And then I started writing for different media platforms. And then also I was getting some feedback, some comments, and more in, I will say, appreciative ways. Some of the my teachers, my colleagues were able to find distinct language in my writing. And I think all these elements, all these aspects emboldened me to engage with these kinds of writing. And then I started writing, and this all the essays that you are reading now had its appearance, it appeared, some of the essays appeared in a very short format, many times in Outlook, many times in Indian Cultural Forum, and sometimes in a scroll. So all these formats, but again, the problem with that format is that they will ask you to write in 800 words, they will ask you to write in 1000 words. And then if you want to explore the themes, you will not be able to explore the themes. And then I was thinking that whether there is a possibility to write something. And I wrote the book, it kind of I created a monograph. I was sending to publisher. Publisher was not happy because again, this is not academic writing, but this is also not a popular writing. So what exactly you are writing? This is not poetry. This is not this. So it is not fitting into the kinds of genre. And then at a point of time, in fact, I was thinking that maybe I need to release this book on Facebook. Otherwise, there was no option. But then, somehow I came in contact with Leftward, and they took this project. And after that, the things became it now came as a book. So yeah, so it has been different kinds of but for me, this whole idea of the writing, because I think that So when I was doing this writing for social media, like media platforms, then I was also trying to explore my own poetry, that how I'm going to do like lyrical writing. So how I'm going to bring my own passion in my own writing, how I'm going to bring some kinds of anger and the frustration that I'm feeling. And then I also started again rereading Arundhati Rai, Maggie Nelson. I have a beautiful book by Maggie Nelson, Bluets. So Maggie Nelson Bluets, it's like a very poetic prose kinds of writing. So really, this like, again you have Claudia Rankine's Citizen, and so all these like different kinds of book where like scholars were trying to engage with some kinds of lyrical essay kinds of mode. I was also very much getting influenced with that writings, and most precisely I should say that those writings, because they're speaking to me, and I was able to feel, I was getting the sense of liberation in these modes of writing, and therefore I felt that I was able to make some of those connections. So now you have also debate about that how lyric essay can be considered as a resistance itself. And there is a, because it brings many things together. It brings, for example, if you're thinking about that, then it brings many elements. So it brings memoir, and that is what I do many times. I bring my own narratives. I brings poetry, so it brings memoir, it brings poetry, it brings prose, it brings all kinds of anthropological elements, it brings philosophical elements. So there is no boundaries. And I think this is what becomes an exploration for me, because one of the things, and that would be my argument also to put here, that many times when we write and when we try to think in terms of method and methodology, we generally think in terms of binary, that okay, this is Marxism, this is Ambedkarite politics, this is like feminist politics, and this is through we provide some kinds of lens and conceptual framework to our own studies. But I will say definitely if you're thinking about actions and practices on the ground, then that is not the connection that you will find. That generally the things are not just that way, completely compartmentalized, or that way works in a binary. So I think there is a possibility that how to go against this idea of the purity of thoughts, that this whole idea of the purity of the frameworks, the purity of the methodology, the purity of the conceptual framework. So one way in my writing, what I'm trying to do is that corrupting all these forms, that how to corrupt all these possible forms that make some kinds of puritanical claims that, okay, this is this methodology, this is this methodology, and how to do these different kinds of things together. And what I realized when I was writing, I did not realize, but this comment came in many of the discussion. And I think we had this person who was editing my book, Devi Vijay, and Devi Vijay first used the term quilt, that you are doing some kinds of quilting. And then I think, and because I was not aware of the term, of course, we all see quilting in our own family. If you're coming from marginal background, then you have seen that कि वो हमारे यहाँ बोलते हैं, बिहार और नॉर्थ इंडिया में बोलते हैं गेंद्रा. तो गेंद्रा को कैसे बनाते हैं, डिफरेंट जो बचा खुचा जो कपड़ा आपके पास रह जाता है, जो कपड़े फटे चिटे जो पुराने कपड़े रह जाते हैं, उससे आप गेंद्रा कैसे सिलते हैं. So basically it is about patchwork, that how you are doing the patchwork. Patches can come from philosophy, patches can come from anthropology, patches can come from your own experiences, patches can come from different others' experiences. And therefore what I am doing literally is not original work, but the patchwork, or gendra silna, or in other words, we can say quilting. And I think then later also this debate came when Professor Nivedita Menon was discussing this book. And she said, she also used the term that somewhere I'm doing this quilting, this exercise of quilting. And then I think this term, again, the methodology, talking about the methodology, then I think quilting is emerging as a methodology where I'm trying to bring some kinds of patchwork and some kinds of bringing different kinds of colors together to make some kinds of pattern. I'm not sure about the patterns many times, but because this pattern also incites me, because it also gives me some kinds of passion, inspiration, and also some kinds of connection to speak to you. And therefore, I think this patchwork is really working in that sense. So that is about, what you can say about, the methodology I can talk about. And when I'm say that I don't have a specific methodology, it is a methodology coming from the heart that becomes a passionate methodology. And if you read this book, because I don't know how many of you have read this book, and I'm going to give you, because I will give you the taste of the text in that way, to make this larger connection, that how maybe those connections are coming, or maybe I have failed, because it still remains an exploration for me, and that is through which I am working. And because this person, this methodology also have a lot of connection with feminist methodology, and I think that many of the marginalized poets, so either you are thinking about Kabir, either you are thinking, so give him, it's a weaving, it is a different kinds of metaphors that is also making these kinds of what is now I can use the term quilting becoming possible in my writing. And I will see that I'm not very satisfied. I still feel the necessity that I still feeling a sense of separation, that I've become part of that union, the part of the quilting. But yes, I will precisely say this is a very dispirited, or I will say fragmented methodology that I can talk about. But I think there is a necessity to invent this methodology for all of you who are going to be new research scholars or scholars in established scholars in the field, because what we necessarily need is the methods and methodology to make different kinds of claims. Otherwise, there is a possibility that we are just putting our own work, very original work, in existing kinds of conceptual framework, or not possible to make the kinds of departure that we can make. And therefore, I'm saying that not necessarily I'm providing you a paradigm or methodology for that matter, but I always feel the necessity of method and conceptual framework and the sense of newness that we all need to invent. So that is about that two questions that I think precisely we talked about. This one, that how this book, how the things motivated me to write this book. And second is the question of methodology that we can all talk about, and still remains, I will say, unfulfilled dream in which I am still navigating. Now, what I will do, if you have some specific questions, I can take it here also. But again, I would like to read out some excerpt from my book to give you a taste of the text if you have not read that book yet. Should I go, or you have some?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can give us some sense of the book.
So I'm just trying, because there are, again, you don't have single pattern, many times chapters, many times you find there's some conceptual kinds of claims are getting in one chapter. In another chapter, you just have poetry. You just have a very poetic language, a flowering language for that matter. So I would like to read out just to give you some kinds of glimpses about the text, and to also to again make it possible that you may feel motivated to read this book. So it is one first chapter is called When We Can't. I will just give you an idea about the chapterization. So it has 8 chapters. When We Can't Breathe, where I'm talking about the sense of breathlessness, but not I'm necessarily talking about the pandemic-like situation, because I'm saying that breathlessness becomes a symptomatic condition of Indian Hindu society, and that we all feel many times, and people at the margin feel more than anybody else. So this is the first chapter. Second chapter deals with the words and demagogues, that how it is not necessarily our bodies are getting curtailed, but how words are getting curtailed, how sabda, what we say like a beautiful term, sabd, is getting curtailed, and what happens. So for example, if you want to lynch the body, it is necessarily that first you have to lynch the words. First you have to make the community something else, or you have to other the communities to attack that community. So words and demagogues have second chapters. And then I talk about Muslim hating in the bone of the nation, and some kinds of new kinds of development that we are seeing in the country, where Muslim hating is almost becoming the backbone of the nation. And then I move to this fourth chapter, this with the dance of the migrant laborers. So this is a very, I will say, paradoxical chapter, but it also kinds of irony that we can talk about. Like when you think about dance, you think about some beautiful kinds of movement. But when I'm talking about the dance of the migrant laborers, then you can think about the movement I can talk about. But because nobody else can match the movement, even not a dancer, like a migrant laborers, and therefore the metaphor of dance becomes very interesting for me to discuss this whole idea of the dance of the migrant laborers. And then the fifth chapters discuss about the trial of the art, poets, artists, and the authoritarian states. So what happens? So why, many you have already have a debate that, for example, that how poets, artists are getting attacked, but why they should become a special? Why their attacks? If minorities are getting attacked, if Dalits are getting attacked, if other communities are getting attacked, then why the attacks on poets and artists should become so special? So I discuss about very ontological sense. I discuss about the ideal of the state and ideal of the art, in which both necessarily go against each other. So how the ideal of the art and ideal of the state becomes contradictory to each other, and therefore necessarily generates some kinds of contradiction, and to that extent it becomes a conflict. And after that, I have developed I have this chapter called March of the Mustard. It is largely about the farmers' protest, but it is also discussing about the possibility of the protest and how we are reading violence in protest. Because nowadays, when you are talking about the protest, then the very idea of the protest itself galvanizes some kinds of violence. So how a state is reading the protest, how authorities are reading the protest, but what should be the idea of the protest that we can expand or can reclaim back. And then you have like a chapter on a strike, and I discuss about Una strike. And for me, the Una strikes become very, very a special moment in Indian history, not because it was a movement that was happening against the authoritarian regime, but it was expanding the very notion of the workers' strike. Because usual way of thinking about Una strike would be that, okay, workers' strike is something different and Una strike is something different. I'm taking a lot from Baba Sahib Ambedkar and talking about that how Una strike is expanding the notion of the very strike itself, and therefore not necessarily both are contradictory to each other. And then I talk about the last chapter, so for the date, mourning and solidarity. And then that becomes an idea that how mourning can become a site of solidarity, where I'm talking about that why a state and authorities. So one can talk about that how people are getting, like people's movement are getting curtailed, but why mourning should be curtailed. And that becomes a kind of, like, if you're thinking from humanitarian crisis, then that becomes something, major questions about humanity, that how a state or authorities are trying to curtail the very idea of the mourning, the death celebration, the last ritual. So what should be why authorities should be afraid of this last ritual that itself is called like last event for that matter, and one hope that one will not get punished in the day after the death, but how a state is also punishing somewhere and try to, like, we've heard this whole idea of the dignity, because at least we have the deep notion of dignified death. But again, people are not able to get the dignified death. So what happens in a society where a person is not able to even get a dignified death? And that has been structured, and it talks about the larger concerns about that, is it the end of everything? And I precisely, and that has been a debate that I'm talking about, a lot more hope. So I think book also provides a lot of hope than what you can think in terms of curtailment. Now I would like to go with some excerpt from the book. And this is from the first chapter, When We Can't Breathe. When we can't breathe is the sign and symptoms of the curtailment of life and freedom. The symptoms shows a condition that is closed, but it is not yet closure yet. It has not yet reached a dead end. Unlike closure, curtailment is still a process. It is a movement towards closure that can be interrupted. The barricade is there, but it can be crossed. Despite its moment of despair, it is the condition in which you are still breathing. You are still alive. There is still hope. There is a time to retreat. There is a time to interrupt. The body can still cross the barricades beyond life and death. Even in the death of a person, I can't breathe can become a rallying point, as we have seen in the case of George Floyd, Rohit Vemula, and 2012 Delhi gang rape case. At any time, bodies can emerge as an assembly, walk in alliances, and move against closure, against the distance, as we have seen in the case of farmers' protest and Delhi in 2020-21. Sense of breathlessness is a moment of suspension. At that moment, what matters is not the lockdown, but the deadlock, the impasse that one cannot announce. It becomes the rites of passage for both the authorities and the unauthorized, the migrants, the minorities, and those engaged in civil disobedience. How do we think about the deadlock situation when things do not move? Time stops, a space sucks, death looms larger than life, the dream gets devilish, and thinking becomes a clinical act. You think, but you cannot move. It is like running away in a dream. You want to inhale the wind like a Chinese dragon, but you feel lack of a space. The present becomes so alarming that future does not hold. Time appears suspended in the time and a space contained within a place. The bodies between life and death, and you and me fall in love in isolation. Thinking about social distance is like a living without breathing. This happens more at the psychic level as things do not move. Every breath slows down time and distance, and the day breaks down the spatial and temporal sovereignty of a nation. The condition has come to the body, it has come to the words, it has come to the breaths. One words become prey, mob lynching becomes a chill out game. Then the worst is not the killing, but the fun of the violence it enacts, the fear it creates for the future, and the freedom it curtails. It seems that mob violence, that lynching were never so chilling and chill out games in the Republic. Mixed with lies, violent fun spreads faster than a smile. Oscar Verkaik observes that in such a situation, violence becomes constitutive of group identity. In his view, it provides social solidarity to violent group. A new politics is born purely based on blood and violence. When you see this becoming politics in the 21st century, you feel suffocated. We can sense the problem of breathing both from the points of freedom and barricades. Anyways, the idea of freedom and barricades were never so far away. They were just a body apart. Even when one falls on the barricades, one strengthens the notion of freedom. Borders not only separates, they also are connecting points. Freedom and barricades look for each other as a hunter looks for its prey. Both often meet on the walls, on the fences, on the windows, bodies suspended like bats on the barricades shouting slogans of freedom, and gallows marking the sign of resistance in the neck, on the neck. One is right to think from the viewpoint of freedom as Arundhati Rai does in Azadi. I would like to sense it from the points of barricades, the points of curtailment, and from the zones of confinement, or the what John Berger would say, the landmark of the prison. Across the planet, we are living in a prison. So this is one section, and if we have time, I can read out a few more sections. So this is about curtailment of words, how curtailment of words that we see in rhetoric, that we see in slogan, that we are witnessing in media, that first things that we are witnessing that how words are getting curtailed, how words are getting preyed upon. Though several saints and poets were against text, they were rarely against words. They saw the creation power and wisdom in them. They saw jiva in words that animated the life forces. For them, words were the site of world making. Sufis and saints perceived the echoes of words pervading the universe through the nad, the unstruck sound. It is through words that poets created their life world. They saw words as a character dancing on the canvas. They themselves become words to enter the hearts of the gods and lovers. They saw it all begin with words in the very act of the naming, when the unnamed was named. Nama, or name, was the nemesis of all creations. Saint and Fakir sang in praise of Nama, the act of constant naming. Words have a much deeper significance for poets, healers, and philosophers. They become the carrier of their lives and messages. For them, the words is the soul of creative power. It is the site where creation begins and ends. It is the connecting principles between you, me, and the world. It has the magical power of transformation. So, and that you will find that a lot of the people, for example, you have, so they were striking like so many scholars. So people say that Walter Benjamin rarely used words unnecessarily. Karl Marx's writings interview life and words so intricately that the readers wonders whether they are reading a text or a life. Jean-Paul Sartre, deployment of words shows his quest for freedom and truth. Ambedkar's call to annihilate caste is not only an attack on the caste system, but also an onslaught on the words that sustain and perform it in our everyday lives. If Maya Angelou words gives us wings to fly, Toni Morrison words offer us healing. Their rhythm and resonance, finding meaning in the bold utterances. They are bodies finding names in the worlds. They are the strings resonating in the bodies. They are the sounds pulsating in our bloods. They are the footprints making history in the absence of archives. For activists and philosophers, words are full of life and action. Their power and authority can imprison the bodies, but words can go beyond enclosure and perform the task of freedom. I am citing this example precisely because, once I was talking to famous balladeer from Telangana, Gadar. He's a famous balladeer coming from, again, marginalized communities. And so he was saying that, you see, the way you write and the way we write are different. And then I asked how we both write differently. And he says that when you write your paper, then you think that, okay, 250 words of the abstract, and you just type 250 words abstract. This, and 250 words are full, or 1,000 words of paper. But when I write, then I imagine every word have its life, and Sabd is Jiva. Then he was giving example of Kabir, that how Kabir was thinking, every word has its life, and unless you are not activating the words, I think we are not able to make the larger connection that one can make, and therefore that was his imagination about thinking about the words. One more section, and I think I should stop. Yeah, this is from Una strike that I was saying that how it is expanding the notion of workers' strike itself. And this starts with a poem, a song, The Strike. We want to feel the sunshine and we want to smell the flowers. We are sure that God has built it and we mean to have 8 hours. We are summoning our forces from the shipyard, shop, and mill. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. And this was a famous slogan that became part of the workers' strike. Yeah, 8 hours is a beautiful memory of the glorious history of the workers' strike. It was not technology, horology, astrology, or the movement of the sun or stars, but it was the workers' strike that changed the sense of time in modern history. It was the slaves' strike that sent the sun to set. Otherwise, sun set neither for the empire nor for the slaves. Sudras and slaves never had their own time. Work time, rest time, holidays, and weekdays look so natural today, but they were not always right. Workers brought down the hours of brute force forced by a strike. They did it by putting their bodies on the barricades, participating in a siege, refusing to work, and creating a situation of a riot. On one on 1st May 1886, hundreds of thousands of workers laid siege to the railroads and factories in the United States. They halted the machine, they shut down the factory gates, they blocked the movement, they seized time and history. They gave a slogan that resonated like a song: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. The legacy of media strike is beautiful as well as explosive. It is explosively beautiful. Its beauty lies in its radicalism. But how do we think of a strike at a time when the authoritarian regime is criminalizing peaceful protests? They labeled the peaceful anti-CA protests as anti-national assembly. They called the farmers' movement as a terrorist gathering. The UNA strike in Gujarat in 2016 brought back the question of a strike again. When rights and dissents were facing curtailment, it renewed its commitment to a strike that can be termed as a bare minimum protest. In the UNA strike, India witnessed one of the most powerful and aesthetic modes of protest in recent history. It remains unparalleled in its evocation and precariousness. It used actions that were unsettling to the authorities. It deployed the art of disgust that was repulsive to the Hindu social order. You remember that during the UNA strikes, how the protesters were throwing carcasses around the around these buildings of admin officers, and again outside the Hindu social order, outside of the Hindu society. So it deployed the art of disgust that was repulsive to the Hindu social order. The artwork of Pune stood against the notion of purity. So I read this throwing of the carcasses, all this collection of that bones as a kind of artwork or an installation work, and how it can be read as an artwork that provides some kinds of resistance. It unleashed danger at a sublime level. It appeared with terror and awe. It exposed the hypocrisy of Hinduism, but its larger significance seemed to be much larger than what it did. It has to do with how you strike to make a strike meaningful in a specific cultural context. If the larger significance of Bhima Koregaon lies in the fact that the Dalits can defeat upper caste Peshwas by challenging caste supremacy, the larger significance of the UNA strike lies in the fact that a caste society can be seized and Hindu society can be put on hold. It also indicates that mode of a strike that works in one part of the world may not work in other parts of the world. While taking the knee as a symbolic mode of protest has been quite successful in the United States, it has symbolically failed in India. It also says that mode of protest that words work for one gender and class may not work for others. Some modes are more accessible to women and lower caste. Some modes of protest only privilege the civil society. The UNA strike placed the question of cultural significance at the center. It was one of the most ingenious, indigenous, and integral strike in India's recent history. So I should stop it here. Otherwise, I keep going on, because this is the whole beauty. Because if you're going to ask me the question, then precisely I would not be able to put forth this whole idea of the force of the writing. So what I'm necessarily talking about the force of the writing, because one of the arguments that I would like to make it here, that many times things happens in genre. So for example, if you're thinking about bhakti kinds of philosophy, bhakti or Sufi kinds of philosophy, this could only happen in music. I cannot think about the bhakti or Sufi kinds of philosophy happening in analytical language or that kinds of academic language for that matter. And therefore, what I'm discussing is about that many times writing is becoming more I would say is able to explicate something because it generates its own force, and it can only by reading it, I think, one can be able to make some kinds of like judgment on this text. Otherwise, I don't think that if it is about like an analytical language that I possibly can answer your questions. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, it was a brilliant and ingenious way of presentations, which seems as not just an academic work, but kind of literature or looking or watching kind of cinema actually. So now it's time for the question answer session. So I would like to request those who have questions, they can raise their hand and ask questions. It will be more good if they will ask in voice actually. That will be interactive mode. So now you can raise your hand. I have also some questions. So before going to that, I can pose some question. Like when you have using this this term actually, I would like to use the term art. That you also use that art of disgust. So how the very idea of art itself have different meaning. That in general sense, we usually understood that arts is a kind of very fascinating, very beautiful way. But after listening you and also some part of reading of your books, that create me art is nothing but something else which have we are in general sense we are not getting that sense of art actually. Like during the resistance itself was a kind of art. So how do you differentiate this resistance and the life in our own life, whatever we are doing, it is a kind of art, and the artist or the poets or any painters are doing the paintings. How these two categories is different, and how do you look this actually? This was my question actually. You are muted, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, because we generally carry this very dominant notion of this idea of the art and aesthetics, that it is all about beautiful, it is all about like some kinds of creation. But art is like if art is about creation, it is equally about destruction. Because if you are thinking about all the big artists, I think what they do, that they break the notion of the language, they break the notion of the structure, they break the notion of the color, they break the notion of the boundaries. And I think most beautiful idea of the art lies in this idea of the destruction, not necessarily in creation. And because we carry this very dominant idea that art is just about creation, and therefore we perceive these notions in a very general way. Second is that now that whole notion of the art and definition of art also has changed, because if you're thinking in a more Kantian sense, or that way, like more, I will say, European sense, or Western sense for that matter, then art was this whole idea of the science of beauty, or what like Baumgarten will talk about when he was talking about aesthetics. Then he will talk about the science of the beauty. But now you have like different other ideas about the arts and aesthetics for that matter. And if you read like Ronsier, scholars like Ronsier, he will talk about redistribution of sensible. And that is the way I would like to perceive art. So it is not about necessarily about the science of beauty or symmetry or some kinds of beautiful structure that we are talking about. And especially we are talking from very egalitarian point of view. If you're thinking about transformative politics, transformative potentials of the art, then I think we need to talk about redistribution or distribution of the sensible. संवेदनाओं का वितरण कैसे किया जाए, and that should becomes our fundamental idea of the art. Same day, even in my work, like previous work, cultural labor, I have discussed about the aesthetics. For me is fundamentally a question of labor, because it is where you are generating a lot of values. This is good, this is bad, this is disgust, this is right, and this is wrong. And therefore, when we are talking about the values, then art and labor both come together, and both are creating some kinds of values. So I think first, if you are thinking about more transformative potential of art and aesthetics, then we need to completely destroy that whole established notion of the art itself, that this is not the art we are talking about. We are necessarily talking about the redistribution of the sensible. We are talking about the संवेदनाओं का वितरण, संवेदनाओं का नया वितरण कैसे किया जाए. और ये जो है like so we can talk about different ways. So it is about talking in terms of movement, talking in terms of like in context of the bodies, talking in terms of different distribution of the colors, different distribution of the metaphors. And I will give you one example. So I was working on again Gadar and Jannat Mandi from Telangana. But again, I come from Bihar, where you have like North India. You have very different, like we are talking. So in this song, so what Gadar is doing, that you have revolutionary figures that are coming as a puppies, dogs, like small dogs, they're coming as a puppies. And when I was listening these songs, I was really shocked that I cannot think about these kinds of metaphors in North India. But see how he's like completely changing the meaning of the metaphors itself. Same way he has a beautiful songs on chappals, slippers, beautiful songs on slippers, where he's trying to aestheticize, he's trying to give a new kinds of ideals to the slippers, new kinds of image and figuration to the chappal. By giving this new name, these new figures, these new kinds of imagination, he's not able to only to give some kinds of dignity to the object, he's also able to create new notion of arts and aesthetics. And I think precisely we need to shift this notion of like, the art that we carry, the image of the art that we carry as a creation, as a very ideal notion of symmetry, or very idealized notion of like, the beauty that we can talk about. But yeah, there is a lot of debate that can come up here. So I'm not necessarily giving you an answer, but just trying to.
Okay, thank you.
And just,
Kumar, actually.
Sorry, one example, because I'm getting like, really, after getting your question, I'm getting really provoked. So I'm trying to just answer your question. So for example, we think about Kabir's poetry, what Kabir is doing. Kabir is breaking the notion of language, grammar, everything at that like, point of time, at that point of history. And so and that is why, like, when you are thinking from very Kantian notion, then Kant will talk about two terms, talented and genius. So talent is an artist who can replicate the things the way it is. So you have good, if you are a good Bharatanatyam dancer, you can just replicate that dance, but the genius should break the form itself. And therefore, I will say Kabir is a genius in that sense that he's breaking the notion of the language, the grammar, the very notion of the sabda itself. And therefore, different ways we can talk about art and aesthetics. And yeah, sorry.
Thank you. It actually provides some sense. Manendra Kumar actually write in the chat box. You can read, or should I read for you?
Okay, so this is an interesting questions, and I think, and I think we need to think about these questions in two ways. One, that because we are also seeing the mythification in the name of like history, in the name of other things are also happening, where like, one group is saying that whatever claim you are making in terms of epic, in terms of some kinds of imagination, that can also become an evidence itself. Second argument that precisely coming from Kanchailaya and many other scholars, we also need to have that like argument also. So for that matter that we don't have evidence, we don't have proof. And I have written one article that is called Archives Are a Scam, few years back, I think 2 years back. And precisely I was talking about that you can like, if needed, you can create your evidence. If needed, you can create your proof. And therefore, like not necessarily that, yes, so when I'm giving footprints, because many times if you are publishing something, then that becomes a systematization and that becomes a part of that writing also. But yes, I quite many times, but it also depends what kinds of writing you are doing. So wherever like, I had some like references, I have provided the references, but yes, if you want to go to that extreme, say that, yes, we don't have evidence, we don't have proof. So there is no idea of like, we cannot necessarily carrying this idea of the referencing, or we will create our own referencing, then I think I can also quite okay with that. And I remember doing one interview in UP where like I was talking to one person, one activist, Bahujan activist, and so I was asking him that you are making this claim about this deity, do you have any proof? And he told me that कि सर आप 2 महीने के बाद आ जाइए, मैं आपको प्रूफ दे दूंगा. तो मैं पूछा कि आप करेंगे क्या? कहा कि तब तक हम बुकलेट छपवा लेंगे, तब तक मैं आपके लिए एक बुकलेट छपवा के रख दूंगा, जो मैं कर रहा हूँ उसका बुकलेट बन जाएगा. So yeah, so but again, this is the very like strong argument about creating your own evidence. So I think many times we also need to create our own evidence. But yes, wherever available, I think it is not also a bad idea to provide referencing in that sense. So I'm not making like this boundary or that boundary. Whatever suits you can go with that.
Anyone else? Those who have questions, then we can take. We have. Okay, Vidyasagar asked. Yasasvi Pathak, you can ask. Yasasvi.
Yes, I am audible.
Yes, you are audible.
सर मेरा सवाल ये है कि अभी हम जैसे आर्ट पे बात कर रहे थे कि आर्ट हम कहेंगे किसको, तो उसी से जुड़ा हुआ मेरा सवाल ये है कि जैसे हम देखते हैं कि चाहे वो हिंदी लिटरेचर हो या उर्दू लिटरेचर हो, मैं लिटरेचर की बात कर रही हूँ आर्ट में, तो हम देखते हैं कि एक बहुत बड़ा शायरों, लेखकों, कवियों का एक बहुत बड़ा तबका ये कहता है कि जो कला है उसका उसका कोई उद्देश्य नहीं है, मतलब उसका उद्देश्य ये नहीं है कि वो समाज में कोई परिवर्तन लाए या वो समाज के पिछड़े वर्गों, महिलाओं, दलितों या किसी भी तरह का वो अपने ऊपर एक बाउंडेशन या एक जिम्मेदारी नहीं रखना चाहते हैं। और दूसरा मतलब एक ऐसा भी तबका है, शायद वो बहुत कम है, जो एक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी या कला में एक उद्देश्य देखते हैं कि हाँ कला का एक उद्देश्य है। तो मेरा सवाल यही है कि क्या कला का कोई उद्देश्य है या होना चाहिए, और जिस कला में उद्देश्य नहीं है क्या हम उसको भी आर्ट या कला कह सकते हैं? ये सवाल है सर।
So shall I answer this one or shall I take more questions? So
It's up to you.
okay, so I would like to answer then.
Okay.
Yes, we thank you for asking this question क्योंकि ये डिबेट चल रहा है, काफी ज्यादा डिबेट है इस पे, और again I think it's a very complicated kinds of arguments that we can like make it here. I'm just trying to generalize it here. So I think this whole idea of that art or like no art should not have any purpose, or this whole idea of the purposefulness or usefulness of the art, that comes from many times very Kantian discourse, very modern kinds of Kantian discourse that we can think about. So वहाँ पे है distance, like they will talk about distancing in art, they will talk about the purposefulness in art, they will talk about disenchantment in art. So this all the discourses has been very much part of the, like I will say, in a constructed by very modern Western kinds of discourses. And then it has its school, like it has its support, it has its school, and it has its some kinds of signification also. And I will come to this point. And second, you are saying that you have like already have like so there should be art for purpose, there should be art for son. So इसमें और भी debate है. So you have a wonderful like beautiful book by Sarad Patil where he's talking about aesthetics, like feudal caste servitude. And he will say that his whole criticism that because like many times even Marxist scholars who were writing that time, they were thinking that so leisure should be the part of the working class, because only in the leisure time they will create some kinds of art, and because they don't have the leisure time and therefore they cannot produce art. Now the question comes that कि हमारे यहाँ महिलाएं हैं जो कि जाता से पीसते पीसते या चक्की पीसते पीसते जो गीत गा रही थी, हमारे यहाँ पूरा एक जो एग्रीकल्चरल कम्युनिटीज है जो पैडी सॉन्ग्स के पैडी के साथ साथ सॉन्ग बना रहा था, गा रहा था, हम उसके वर्क को कैसे देखेंगे? So if you are putting that key again like in a very leisure time, only in the leisure time one can produce this kinds of art, or the art should only come with some kinds of usefulness, then I think it is addressing to one class society and one community for that matter who have these kinds of privilege. Otherwise, what will happen that if you are not going to recognize other works, then what will happen that only you are recognizing the artwork of maybe like just 2 or 3% of the communities. Rest of the communities who are necessarily working and producing the artwork, their works are not going to be get recognized. At the same time, I would like to say that, but many times it happens that you are doing something, but you are not sure. Many times you are not certain, because this is the where art becomes interesting, because it does not gives you surety, it does not end with the certainty, and therefore it opens up the new things. So maybe at a time you are not recognizing its significance, you are not recognizing its relevance. Maybe you are able to recognize its relevance maybe 200 years after. So this can also happen, that at a point of time what we are saying that it was art just for the art's sake or art for the purpose of some kinds of entertainment, maybe later we find that it is doing something else. So, but again, there are a lot of complex debate that has happened around the theme that you are asking. And I'm not saying that because this art debate cannot happen with the kinds of surety that I'm right or wrong. And therefore I will say that yes, both the debates are there. And I think we need to not necessarily pick up the side, but again, complicate this discussion.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Khushbu and Vidyasagar, you can go now.
Vidya, you can go first. You raise the hand first.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Prakash, for this wonderful presentation and the thought-provoking discussion. Am I audible, Ganesh?
Yeah, you're very much audible.
Yeah. So, sir, I'm doing PhD at the University of Bielefeld, Germany in sociology, and I'm following your work since my master's time in JNU. And
Thank you so much. Oh my God. Okay.
and though we share same belonging from the same region, like I also come from Bihar, and one thing which very implicitly comes in your work when you are making this alternative critique of subalternity and the subaltern representation in the larger discourse of arts and aesthetic. So especially when we look at the literature which emerged from the subaltern discourse, they have focused on the dominant culture and the dominant group. Like if you're looking especially in the north side, the whole subaltern discourse has been put to the Mahasweta Devi and other figures. But when it comes to like Bhikhari Thakur and other legend who has an incredible contribution to the discourse of subalternity, but they have been undermined by those who are representing subalternity actually itself. So how do you see this a very selective biasness within the theorization of subaltern literature, subaltern arts and aesthetic by the Bhadra Lok or Bhadra intellectual society? They don't talk about Bhikhari Thakur, they don't talk about Biraha, they don't talk about the Phagua. These are the different forms where the real subalternity, the actual subaltern group, they represent their anger, their frustration, their emotion. And the second, I'm still looking to read your work here. I'm unable to find the store to locate your work here. When and Also your work remind the one of the very prominent work done by I think Scott Uri in 2012, Barricades and Banner, when he talk about the Jewish communities representation, how the urban metropolitan representation had changed the whole community feeling. So do you think this kind of alternative, no, I won't say alternative is a very vague and such unsustainable term, this very parallel emergence of aesthetic resistance, especially in terms of bodily resistance or literature from the especially from marginalized section, looking like cinema from the southern side, like the recent cinema like Karnan, Ashura and other lot of southern cinema. Do you think such kind of resistance or probably literature or aesthetic, which is very associated with the marginalized community or marginalized section, it also leads to the making a community, making a sense of belonging, rather than de-differentiating from the dominant group? So what do you think? I mean, at first hand it looks like we are segregating or self-segregation from the dominant group, but at parallelly it also creating a sense of belonging, or probably a individual agency or some sort of new institutionalization within that society. So what's your take on these two things? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, and like I'm quite happy to hear this, that like you're following some of my works, and that is like quite a pleasure to know that. Yeah, so this whole idea about like subaltern, I also use the like subaltern communities for that matter. I'm not using subaltern groups. I am not using subalterns. And this debate comes up like whenever people read this work, then they say that okay, what way you are trying to theorize your idea of like subalterns for that matter. And I will say I'm using in terms of lack of the term. So my sense is like I'm like neither. So for example, that obvious if you read, then that like departure is very much there, where I'm clearly saying that I'm not using subaltern the way subaltern studies groups or others people are using, or subaltern that term was used in subaltern historiography. But yeah, I will also say that I've also remained Gramscian to that extent, that I'm trying to not necessarily to reclaim that term, but I can find some kinds of reading or some kinds of resonance that becomes like very, I will say, valuable for me in my own analysis. So for example, even if you are using the term many times, there are two ways, like two, three reasons that I'm not using many times. You will find Dalit Bahujan for that matter. For me, if I'm using Dalit art or Dalit culture or Dalit performance culture, then this is a very conscious communities I'm talking about. When I'm talking about like Vikhai Thakur, when I'm talking about the larger communities, they are not necessarily political conscious communities in that same way. Same way, I'm not using Bahujan because for me, these are the discourses of the consciousness, different kinds of political consciousness they are participating in, and they are creating a new identity, new subjectivities, and possibly they will produce new work of art in future. And I'm looking forward to that very much positively. I'm looking forward to my liking those work. But when I'm looking for subaltern communities, then they remains like very different than very, I will say, historical conscious communities or politically conscious communities for that matter, who the communities who are still remains part of, not necessarily part of the kinds of political mobilization, the kinds of like political subjectivity that we are looking for, necessarily looking in when we discuss about emancipatory discourse or social justice discourse. So for that matter, if you're going to read those communities, then it will generate a lot of complexities. and therefore I must still have some kinds of distancing from using that term, but necessarily so what I'm trying to say that I'm trying to still make a distinction. And subaltern communities gives me a range of the things. So I can talk about nomadic communities, I can talk about different other kinds of communities, which many times maybe Dalit Bahujan terms or categories are not able to capture. Not necessarily I'm always talking about some idea of the majority oppressed communities, but again, the communities can be outside. And for me, I will say nomadic community becomes an interesting kinds of subjects where I will say Dalit Bahujan category necessarily fall out. So yeah, so there are different ways, but again, I will say for me it is more about the political consciousness. When we talk about Dalit political subjectivity or Bahujan culture, the Bahujan political subjectivity, and I think those communities are not yet come to or cannot be discussed in those terms, and therefore I'm precisely not using those terms in my writing. So that is one debate, and necessarily when I write, then necessarily I'm not going into the subaltern studies debate. In fact, many times I say that I do revengeful writing where necessarily I don't want to engage with you. So I think as new scholars, and I think this can be again very provocative kinds of claim to make, but necessarily you also need to not necessarily because if you have not engaged with my history, my writing, my things, then there is also a point that I do not necessarily want to engage with your writings, your art, your things, and I think that should also become a political statement many times, and that goes in my writing many times that okay, yes, your writing is there, but I'm not concerned about your writing. It does not make any point for me. Even if it makes point for me, then I'm not going to talk about you.
Right.
Or I will put you in footnotes. Yeah, so so because we are still, this debate has to arrive, the discourse has to arrive, then many times it is not just about writing, it's also about engaging in a very provocative kinds of debate that I think become part of our strategy and how we are going to write about things. So that is one part. Second, there is a question about that, you see parallel that is happening from Palestine to different parts of the world. And of course, many times you will find that the neoliberal order is doing something. So it is not that problem that we are facing in India. Problem is also people are facing, communities are facing, Black communities are facing in USA, in different parts of the world. So, and that we see that a lot of parallels are happening in terms of a struggle, in terms of operation, and therefore we are having a lot of examples where we are able to see a lot of parallels. And I think this also becomes possible with new technology, social media, or proliferation of these kinds of lot of scholarship that we are able to manage, able to see. Otherwise, that was not possible around 20-25 years back. Even the parallels were happening maybe in Africa, maybe in other parts of the world, but now we see more parallels that is happening there. Second, my point would be that, so if you're making a departure, if you're talking about subaltern community, art of the subaltern community, or art of the marginalized community for that matter, so are you trying to create some different kinds of categories of the art, or different kind of categories of the aesthetics, or your different kinds of language that you are talking about? So I will say yes and no, both. Yes, because many times, because you think that, first of all, we need to recognize that they also have the language, they also have that art. So unless you're not recognizing that, we cannot come and have a dialogue. Because you can have, I generally believe in having a dialogue. I always have a faith in a dialogue. I always think that whether it is about the upper caste, whether it is about the race, or any kinds of hierarchy, we need to have a dialogue. I think only through the dialogue we can make some kinds of departure. So I have a full faith and a strong sense in a dialogue. But again, to have a dialogue, you need to have your own kinds of points, your own arguments, your own artworks. Otherwise, from which point you are going to talk about? So in both yes and no. Yes, we need to create our own artwork. We need to create our own literature so we can have a dialogue. We can have a dialogue from own standpoint, from own vantage point in that way. And that would be my precise position.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This will go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you, sir, for this wonderful discussion and the work. I was reading your work and I was really fascinated by the language that you employ. Mine is a question that the way you describe your book is that it is a book of hope. But the way I read your book is that, yes, it is a book of hope written and produced in times of despair and pessimism. And why I say this is because the context of the pandemic becomes so central to your work. Though you say that this is not a book on pandemic, but the discussion on pandemic lays bare the real and foundational nature of the society and polity we are part of, because many of the references and the notions that we become familiar with are taken from pandemic, like the idea of curtailment, the distancing, and surveillance. So I thought that in the presentation that you gave, I thought that this entire inspiration that you draw from those times was missing somewhere. And can you just let us know that as a writer, how to excavate hope and optimism from our context that are deeply dark and pessimistic? Thank you.
Oh my God. So you are asking, I think, very difficult questions, and I don't think I have answer. And yeah. So what I will do, I would like to read a short section, and I think that will, many of you have already read that book, but just to reiterate my point. So yeah, so necessarily, like, see, for example, I mean, the person, like, for example, in my field, you have a lot of writing about dystopia, you have a lot of writing around hopelessness, you have a lot of criticism of utopia. But I think for me, the precise point, hope becomes interesting, or I will say, like, really political statement for me, precisely for two reasons. One, that if you want to do any kinds of emancipatory politics, egalitarian politics, you cannot do without hope. You cannot do without utopia. And I think I'm also taking this from Seeking Begampura. Hamari, what is her name? Sorry, I'm forgetting. Okay. Seeking
Gail Ombit.
Begampura. Gail Ombit. Sorry, yeah, I'm so sorry for forgetting my favorite author's name. Yeah, so Gail Ombit. So Gail Ombit, again, if you are reading, then this whole idea, she stands somewhere in defense of utopia. And I think that for me, how to one is that how you are going to excavate that hope. That is one point. Second, that how necessarily you need to generate hope, how necessarily you need to generate utopia. Without it, if either you are thinking about activism, either you are thinking about any kinds of change, I don't think we can move without having that kinds of hope and utopia in mind. And I think therefore we necessarily need utopia, we necessarily need imagination, we necessarily need hope to make some kinds of movement keep going. Yeah, so but again, the way I'm trying to see in this book that, like, so either you're thinking about barricades, then bad body on the barricades becomes almost a last hope that you are pushed to the limit. But again, that limits, and that is the way I'm talking about, at least in that chapter, that how you are pushed to the limits, then in that limits also there is a kind of sense that you're trying to breathe out, you're trying to take breath, you're trying to, like, push the boundaries. And I think even if you're thinking about very extreme kinds of situation, then that hope is always there. That hope is so I'm reading, like, something most interesting chapter for me in that way for your question is migrant laborers, because if you're thinking about, like, migrants going back to home in a very precarious situation, in a very precarious, like, life, livelihood, on the question of the livelihood and all these things, then I am reading their movement as a hope. And that would be, like, quite bizarre to read that movement as a hope, where, like, because they were put out of the, like, they were not able to get the livelihood, they were out of the jobs, and the whole question was becoming very, very existential for the laborers also. Then the question comes that how you're going to read the hope. And then, but I see that generally there are the workers who are supposed to participate in a pattern movement. They are the workers whose movement becomes the value, whose access movement becomes the whole, like, profit for the capital. But again, the same workers, when they make the movement, decides that no, they will go back to home for whatever this happens, then that becomes a political statement for me. And this is where I find hope. So I will say that I cannot, like, provide you some formula that how to excavate hope, but I think that we necessarily need to excavate hope to keep our movement on, and to also to, like, to also to keep mobilizing the communities, and also to keep creating the new sense, newness, and the ideas for that egalitarian politics that we all are, like, trying to participate in. Yeah, but I cannot provide you the formula, but I think, yeah, but I think we all need to find our own formula, our own structure, and our own ways that how we are going to engage with this question of hope and utopia and all these kinds of very imaginative kinds of politics that we need to think about.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so now we are going to wind up the meeting. So Thank you, Professor
Ganesh,
Is it
I think there is a
logical to say
question.
that working class produce art in order to minimize the degree of pain of their physical labor? Art help them to keep engaged with physical labor. Yes, so now you see this whole is happening. One that I will say that is the where I'm using the term cultural labor in my book, because I think that two ways it becomes like no one, that you are right, that it gives you some kinds of healing, it gives you some kinds of relaxation, and that also rejuvenate your body to do more work. And now if you go to many corporate sectors, then they are playing music in between. You can go and play badminton in between. You can go and have entertainment, dance and music in between, just to rejuvenate their work, to just make more profit. So one way of saying is that you are right, that yes, many times it minimize the degree of pain of the physical labor, but many times also I will say that it also, so there are two ways we can see that. One, that it is benefiting the worker because you can take some break and go and do and can rejuvenate your body. You can like heal your capacity, but also there is a chance that corporate sectors, capitalism or feudalism for that matter, can exploit that labor further. So it is two ways things, that if you're going to rejuvenate your body, you're going to produce more. And that way also we can see that how now the corporate sectors, the capitalism is doing these kinds of interesting kinds of like entertainment or artwork to make more profit from the workers. So not necessarily I will say one way, it can be like different other ways that we can think about this question of leisure or like physical labor for in that context. Hope I'm able to answer your question, but yeah, again, this is a more complex questions that, and in cultural labor, I have provided these answers, like some of the answers that you are asking here.
Okay, so we don't have more questions, I think. Okay, so thank you, Professor Brahma Prakash, for your time and also providing us a new area. Actually, I can say, since we are from very typical social science background, that's always we are coming to very confusion to engulf this kind of things. Since I have also done in my MPhils that we use aesthetic terms in political theory, like this way we are doing research in our disciplines. So it provides us a new sense and new methodological input which help us in the research methodology as a young scholars. So I would like to thanks also our participants and beloved friends who actually joining us. And we are one announcement that in the upcoming weeks we are going to organize some PhD guidance lectures by PhD scholars, those who are doing PhD. So it will be helpful for those who are preparing for the PhD. So by saying this, I would like to thanks again to Dr. Brahma Prakash, and
Thank you so much again for everyone for participating, asking brilliant questions that many times I could not provide answer, because generally we don't provide answers. So that is our tricks. So, but again, I will say that just like just try to see the book whenever you get time. If you like, read it. Otherwise, just drop it. But
yes, I have started to read.
Yeah. But again, I'm also trying to do my own kinds of experiments. So many times you may like, you may not like, but we need to engage with each other. So thank you so much, and it's always lovely to engage with younger scholars. And so Ganesh, Khushbu, everyone for providing me this platform. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.